You know how some people just never quite shake that feeling of being an outsider, even when they're standing in the middle of the biggest thing in the world? That was Ringo. Always. When he walked into the Beatles in 1962, he wasn't welcomed as a brother. He was the replacement, the guy everyone figured could be swapped out whenever they felt like it. And the press made sure he knew it too. Headlines called him the luckiest drummer alive. Not the most talented, just lucky. Like he won some cosmic lottery by standing behind Lennon and McCartney. Meanwhile, insiders quietly wondered if he really belonged there at all. But here's what most people don't realize. That insecurity didn't start with fame. It started way earlier, in a hospital bed in wartime Liverpool. At the Love Me Do session, producer George Martin brought in a session drummer named Andy White because he wasn't sure the new guy was good enough. Just imagine that for a second. Your first major recording with the biggest band in the country, and they put someone else behind the kit. Ringo talked about it decades later, said the sting never really went away. He joked about making George Martin apology. As a kid, Richard Starkey spent more time sick than he ever did in school. First it was peritonitis, then tuberculosis. He lost years of education while other kids moved on without him. And when he finally got out, he was quiet, shy, convinced that everyone around him knew more than he ever would. That feeling stuck with him. Even later, when he was playing to screaming crowds across the world, part of him still felt like the kid who fell behind. The drums became his escape. He played with local bands like Rory Storm and the Hurricanes. Nothing flashy, but solid as a rock. That's actually why the Beatles called him in the first place. They needed someone more reliable than Pete Best. So Ringo walks into EMI Studios thinking he's the upgrade, the savior, even. And what happens? Within days, he's humiliated. At the Love Me Do session, producer George Martin brought in a session drummer named Andy White because he wasn't sure the new guy was good enough. Just imagine that for a second. Your first major recording with the biggest band in the country, and they put someone else behind the kit. Ringo talked about it decades later, said the sting never really went away. He joked about making George Martin apologize every day, but you could tell it wasn't entirely a joke. That was the first crack. He joins as the supposed solution to their drummer problem, and the very first thing the adults in the room do is quietly replace him on the single. Great start, right? And the press didn't help one bit. Critics kept calling him the least talented Beatle, said he could only keep time. Like that wasn't literally one of the hardest things to do in music. The narrative became that he was lucky to stand near John and Paul. Your first big hit, and the story everyone tells is that you're only there because of your friends. Inside the band, the hierarchy was pretty obvious. John and Paul wrote the songs. George was the frustrated third genius trying desperately to break through. And Ringo, he sang the novelty songs, played the steady beats, made people laugh. Nothing more than that. When Brian Epstein died in 1967, everything got worse. The band lost its stabilizing force. And that quiet, easygoing drummer suddenly found himself stuck between three massive egos. One of them in particular made him feel small. Paul McCartney. Look, Paul's a genius. No question. After Epstein was gone, he stepped up. He wrote relentlessly, organized sessions, kept pushing the others back into the studio when everyone else was drifting apart. Ringo later summed it up simply. Paul always made the phone call. Paul would want us to work all the time because he's the workaholic. Sounds admirable on paper, but inside the band, it felt like control. Paul wasn't just writing songs. He was telling everyone exactly how to play them. The breaking point came during the White Album sessions in 1968. Paul kept obsessing over tiny details and made Ringo redo a simple drum pattern again and again and again. Finally, McCartney just sat down at the drum kit himself to show Ringo how it should be played. For a drummer who had already been replaced once on Love Me Do, that wasn't just a correction. That was confirmation. You're optional. You're replaceable. You don't really matter. So Ringo walked. He literally left the band and disappeared for about 2 weeks. Just gone. And they struggled on without him. Years later, he still talked about the pain of being treated like a piece of equipment instead of a partner. If Paul didn't trust his drumming, what was he even doing there? Paul's perfectionism kept the Beatles' standards incredibly high. but it also made the others feel like hired session musicians on their own records. For Ringo, who already carried that stigma of being the replacement and the least talented, having Paul literally take his seat was like watching his worst nightmare happen right in front of him. Here's the weird twist, though. These two men eventually became each other's last real link to the band. In 2015, Paul stood on stage at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame and personally inducted Ringo as a solo artist. They've toured together since. Paul's called their bond very special. Funny how that works out. If Paul tested Ringo's patience, John Lennon broke something deeper. Because watching your leader slowly disappear into someone you don't recognize anymore, that hurts in a different way. For years, John had been the anchor. Ringo always admired him. Even when the others argued, he stood behind John like a steady shadow. But in 1968, something shifted. Subtle at first, then overwhelming. Yoko Ono didn't just appear beside John. She appeared in the studio, in the creative process, in conversations that used to be just between the four of them. Suddenly, there were 5 presences in the room, and only one seemed to matter. The atmosphere got stranger with every session. During experimental recordings, Yoko would interrupt with suggestions about tone or rhythm. Ringo was stunned, not by her boldness, but by how John reacted to it. Instead of defending his bandmates, John sided with her instantly. He looked at Ringo once and said something like, "Just keep it even. That's enough." For a drummer already carrying that least talented label, the message cut deep. Your opinion ends where hers begins. Tension kept building. George Harrison snapped at one point out of frustration, and John exploded. Slammed a table. Accused everyone of disrespecting her. It wasn't about music anymore. It was about loyalty. And John's loyalty had clearly shifted somewhere else. For someone like Ringo, who valued peace above almost everything, the emotional cost was enormous. In his eyes, the Beatles were losing their leader to a relationship that left no oxygen for anyone else. He acknowledged later that the band was already drifting apart anyway. But there's this rare, heartbreaking memory he shared once about visiting John in New York in 1980. The laughter, the ease, the feeling like they were still brothers after everything. Weeks later, John was assassinated. Whatever tension remained between them never got resolved. It just vanished before they could face it. Then there was Allen Klein, the outsider who turned brothers into enemies. At first, Klein felt like relief. Brian Epstein was gone. Apple Corps was bleeding money. The Beatles were global icons who couldn't balance their own books. Ringo was tired of polished executives who talked nice but achieved nothing. Klein seemed different, blunt, aggressive, willing to fight. He promised to protect them. John embraced him first. George followed quickly, and Ringo, wanting stability more than anything, signed on with them. He explained it simply. Klein was a hustler, and I felt it was time I had someone hustling for me. But behind the charm was a strategist who knew exactly how to use their fractures against them. He studied everything. Paul's need for control, John's restlessness, George's resentment, Ringo's desire for peace. Then he exploited all of it. Meetings that used to be arguments became battlegrounds. Decisions that used to be unanimous became 3 against 1. Within months, Klein had turned internal tension into a full rupture. Paul refused to sign with him. Klein encouraged the other 3 to move forward anyway. Then Paul sued the other Beatles and Klein in 1970. That lawsuit destroyed whatever friendship was left. Every wound between Ringo and the others just got deeper. Distrust, resentment, regret. The brotherhood wasn't just shattered by egos. It was shattered by signatures and courtrooms. By 1973, Ringo realized the man he trusted had mismanaged funds, manipulated contracts, and used the Beatles for leverage. Klein was fired. Investigations followed. The 3 who sided with him, including Ringo, admitted they were wrong. George Harrison once said something devastating. The only way the Beatles can ever get together again is if Allen isn't there. I'm ready. So is Ringo. That confession shows everything. For Ringo, Klein represented the deepest betrayal. The man he trusted to protect them became the man who made sure they would never stand on a stage together again. So after all that, Was Ringo really the least talented Beatle? The critics loved saying so. The drummer who got lucky, carried by Lennon and McCartney. After the breakup, those words echoed louder because there was no band to hide behind anymore. But time exposed what the critics missed. The same sessions where Paul grabbed his drum seat and John dismissed him were also the sessions where producers noticed something. Ringo almost never drifted off tempo. George Martin, who once replaced him on Love Me Do, later admitted Ringo wasn't just reliable. He was the click track, the human anchor holding everything together. Younger drummers tried copying his parts and couldn't match the feel. His solo career produced real hits, and legends like Harrison, Clapton, Dylan, and Elton John kept calling him back. Not for nostalgia, because his groove lifted their music. He wasn't the least talented Beatle. He was the heartbeat, the steady foundation that let the other three soar. And the longer time passes, the clearer that becomes.